Alrighty, folks, I hate long intros, so we're jumping straight into this. For this piece, I did not need any kind of complex or realistic background. I just need that white canvas covered. So I'm starting by scribbling all over it with a toothbrush. Now, you might look at that and be like, wow, that's not very impressive art. I could do that. In which case, you are completely correct. This is not impressive. This is not difficult. You could do it, and you should do it. This is so much fun. Even if you don't have plans for a picture, I highly recommend just grabbing a canvas. They're not that expensive and scribbling all over it with some paints. It is so much fun. But if you do want to use this as a background, I do have some tips that are going to help you out. This is really, really practical in a lot of ways, especially compared to a solid background that you might end up having to like color match later on if you mess something up in your foreground. But you can have a lot of unintentional effects with this. You might make it too chaotic, and then your piece, what you're actually wanting to stand out, won't stand out. One good way to combat that is to be careful about your color choice. Have colors that will work well with what you're putting in front. Like in this case, I've got one color, that yellow is actually going to be what I write over this with. And then the blue, green, and purple color that I've got all blend together really well and will have a high contrast with those letters. So they're going to pop off the canvas really well, but they're also going to feel connected to the background just a little bit because I've got some of that yellow in the background. You also want to be intentional about your brush strokes. You don't want to accidentally lead people's eyes in a direction you didn't mean to. So like in this case, I was doing it with my right hand and I ended up with a lot of brush strokes that had the same kind of curve to it because of that. And that's why I flipped my canvas over so that I would end up with a lot of kind of the opposite curves. That way they kind of cancel each other out and they're not really leading people's eyes in any particular direction like they were before. It's more of a circular vibe than a specific angle. You can intentionally have your brushstrokes lead people in a certain direction, especially if you want to affect kind of the overall energy of your painting. If you want it to feel very stable, maybe you'll do a lot of horizontal lines, or if you want it to have a lot of energy and kind of a sense of change to it, you might do a lot of angles. Or you could have them all sort of point just a little bit, or many of them sort of point towards a focal point. There's a lot of things you can do, but you want to make sure that you just don't accidentally do something you weren't meaning to. All right, so this next bit is where people start to think that a bit of skill gets involved, which I think is funny because I have terrible handwriting, and this painting absolutely shows that. This is about as nice as my writing ever gets, and there are still some weird shapes and some weird gaps between letters, and it's a mess, but it's a handmade mess. If I wanted these to be perfectly clean and crisp and, all just nice proportions, everything's good, I would have gotten a stencil or I would have printed it out or, I would have used the tools I needed to create that effect. But that's not the effect I was going for. I wanted this to be handmade and clearly handmade. Now, I think one issue that I've seen a lot with new artists is holding themselves to standards of digital art and of 10 times speed TikTok videos. So that's why I'm showing you the P specifically in real time. So this is the actual speed I painted that, and it is not the same speed with which I could write a P with a pencil. Shocking. I run out of paint several times. I have to go back and fill in places where I pressed too hard and so not enough paint went down. I have to go back to that really rough edge on the long stretch there and just widen the line so that it hides that rough edge. And it still does not look all that great at the end. It's just fine. And that's fine. Good enough is good enough. I think it's really, really important to understand that things don't have to be perfect. And our idea of perfect is usually wrong anyway. So give yourself time to make things look good. I've seen a lot of people give up on something when it's halfway and you've got those big gaps and stuff, and like all you need to do is just go back and fill it. but you've decided in your head that it looks bad not because it's not done, but because you're bad at it, and that's not true. And then sometimes you've got it in your head that it's bad because you're bad at it, when actually it's just normal because you're normal. And that's okay. We're all kind of normal, and that's just how humans are. Of course, we're all a little abnormal too, which is why I have ideas that you don't have, and you have ideas that I don't have. This is, I think, what makes being a human surrounded by humans so fun. We all think differently, we all speak differently, we all create differently. Even if both of us are visual artists, maybe one of us is the kind who writes complete across a canvas and then rips it up, and the other might be the kind who photographs a pretty sunset at waterfall. Sunset at waterfall. Wow. Yeah, that's something you might do. And both those things are completely valid. Both those things, make people think and feel in positive ways, but they're completely different. And that's beautiful. That's almost as beautiful as a sunset at waterfall. Anyway, getting back to the painting at hand, I had decided from the beginning that I wanted to have two vertical rips, that I wanted them to be asymmetrical, and both of them reach down into the word. And I kind of had this design in my head, and as I finished making it, I did the last step I planned on doing, I realized it was still missing something. So I looked at it from different angles and distances. I messed around with different things. I worried for a bit that maybe I had ripped too far, and if one of them was further and one of them was way less, that might be the solution. Uh, After a while, I realized that what was missing was a horizontal rip. For some reason, I am always drawn back to this kind of design where there's two strong vertical lines and one horizontal line. That has crept up in a lot of my different pieces of art, and I have no idea why that speaks to me so much. So if anyone has an idea, please let me know. But I definitely liked this one better once it had that. And when I came back to it the next day, I decided it needed one step more, but that was it for the design. So I did some sewing, intentionally very messily. Like, somebody came in and saw how uncompleted this is and tried to fix it, and clearly did not know what they were doing. And then from this point on, everything I did was just about preserving this painting. I've had some paintings with similar kinds of rips and things that have gotten ruined, and there's just no way to fix them. So I really, really did not want that to happen again. One issue that I already partially addressed was shrinkage, because just getting the tiniest bit of moisture on the back of a piece of canvas, it will actually cause it to shrink, which isn't a bad thing most of the time. It usually is actually very helpful. If you have a dent in your canvas, you can fix it using that. But when you've got these ripped strips that are these nice straight lines, they can become curved lines when it gets wet. So I had actually already put a very, very thin layer of resin across the back before I even tore it, which I think should help prevent shrinkage. I also added a bunch more resin on the front, as you can see here, but that's tricky to do. I messed up the paint at one point where it stuck together and I pulled it apart, so then I had to paint over it again, put more resin over it. That resin ended up kind of drippy and goopy, and so I added some UV resin to add a lot of visual texture to kind of make that all seem more intentional. My other big concern was that these rips could accidentally get extended further, and if they accidentally went far enough to meet each other, I could end up with a very big flap of canvas. So I went ahead and I took some just loose pattern canvas that I had, and I cut it on the bias so that the natural direction that it rips is not going to be the same as the natural direction that the main piece of canvas rips. And I glued them together right at the bottom of those tears, and I actually resined over that too. So this whole thing is kind of just one chunk of resin at this point. And then in what is undoubtedly the most relatable part of this video, I attempted to hang it on the wall, and after 3 or 4 attempts, I actually managed to get it almost straight. Then it was time for the last finishing touch. Once this is done, I will be finished with this painting. It will be complete. by making it look a little bit less complete. I'm adding the needle back onto the thread. I want to kind of create the impression that maybe this was left half done, maybe somebody's coming back. There's still a needle on that thread. I really want people to see this and question if it's telling them the truth or not, really. Is this complete because the artist is done with it and it's up on a wall now? Or is it incomplete because there are rips and parts missing and clearly someone's coming back to sew it? I've posed that question to a couple of people, and I've asked about what that might relate to in their lives. And so far, I haven't heard any two of the same answer. So I'd love to hear your answers as well in the comments. And I'd also love to hear if you have any questions or comments that you'd like me to address in any future videos. Have a lovely rest of your day, and if you can make the time, keep making the world better by making things that make you happy.